Hello, travelers. So, I did mention last time I streamed that I'm gonna have to figure out some schedule to play the games that I want to play. Because there's a lot of games that I want to play. I also need to figure out how to wake up on time. I did one of the two correctly, okay? Now, we're gonna go ahead and just do the thing that we need to do. Which is actually finish our games. There's a bunch of games that I've been playing on this channel that I really like to play. One of the games is a Road Warden, which is the music that you're listening to right now. I have the game open, just kind of waiting. And I figured something would be fun is getting some equipment for yourselves. If you haven't seen what the game is, I highly encourage you to go check out the playthroughs on my channels. Links in the profile below. If you're watching the VOD and you're already on the channel, just go back to the uploads and like find it. Just search up Road Warden, okay? There's a playlist for like every single game that I play. It's fully organized in order. Except for the Zelda stuff, I don't know why my Zelda uploads keep on going out of order. I've really tried. Now, we're not done with Tears of the Kingdom. We're not going to take a break. We're going to play it right after. But I figured I should probably finish this one as well as soon as I can. This is a wonderful game. It is a... I don't really know how to explain it. It's like a visual novel. It's like an interactive storytelling piece. It's really interactive. It's so interactive that I'm surprised that that they were even able to make it. It has some things in it that I haven't seen in games in like years, basically. Some mechanics. Things such as being able to type in the exact name of the thing that you think something is, right? It allows you to like guess and it tells you if you're right or you're wrong. It's a very interesting game concept. So far, one of my favorite games. It's actually really good. I got it on a whim during the Ludo Narracon. If you haven't heard of that, it's a new kind of convention for games. The idea behind it was to have a bunch of narrative games and to put the spotlight on them. It was the first one. It was the first one this year. So that's actually very interesting. The first online one, I think. But that's where I found it from. It was on sale, and I was like, "Wow, this thing should not be on sale." But it's a couple years old. And games in general, this is where the pre-stream stuff happens. Games in general are kind of a weird beast. Donkey said it best, where games, like many other products, they're valued in a very strange way in terms of like how much they cost, how much they're like worth. Donkey argued, for instance. If you don't know Donkey, then what are you doing? You haven't been on the internet long enough. He's another YouTuber, a much more famous one. He argued that games should cost a lot more for the stuff that they're actually putting out. If you think about what a single piece of artwork can fetch in terms of price, a game has many dozens of those. Many dozens of pieces of art. It itself is not necessarily the piece of art, though I think you could argue that many games are works of art as a whole instead of just a single piece. And if you don't think that, I think it's possible for you to rethink that opinion once you just play, I think, a single game that sort of matches that descriptor. I think, for instance, Shadow of the Colossus is really, really good with it, both from a gameplay perspective. And again, I think for a game to be a work of art, it has to be all comprehensive, right? The entire thing must be a work of art. I think Shadow of the Colossus, for instance, is a really good one. Great example, I think. Whoa. I think Okami is also pretty decent. And if you compare the price of a single piece of art, you know, or a single story even, a single book that someone writes, to what they charge for games, it's kind of a steal. A game has like hundreds and thousands of pieces of art. Maybe even like tens of thousands, you know. Maybe even like thousands of thousands, like millions, right? You think about the larger games and how much detail goes into them, there's a lot of really creative stuff going on here. Now, it's hard to see when you're playing games like COD and stuff, or games that really try to push fidelity over necessarily, how do you say this, creative content. But the moment that you play a game that has a lot of creative content, hell, even think of something like Tears of the Kingdom, right? There's a lot of stuff in there that's like basically bordering on like pure artwork. So you think about that, and you think about the kind of prices that people put up for like artwork, and you realize, oh wait, maybe games should be priced a lot higher. Even an indie game, which like Rotowind, which we're about to see, can have those same qualities. And to a lot of people, they think it's blasphemy to be like, oh, but games always cost 70, 60. And it's like, but was that really the true price of the stuff? And I think a lot about the true value of things because it plays into sort of the idea of, how do you say this? Business health, right? I was thinking a lot about this as well. And how much a game can demand on the market directly relates to how long that game company can live. Okay, basically, that's how much money that they're able to pull in order to run their operations. Incidentally, Nintendo seems to be a master of this. They're able to charge ludicrous prices for the games, very, very high prices, and yet they're still able to get enough sales to cover it all. Now you might think that it's crazy, right? To charge like what, $100 for a game like this. But again, price per hour, if you do enough calculations on it, it's not that expensive in the long run. For an experience that you're going to be playing for what, hundreds of hours, it's actually not that expensive. And I was very curious too about Nintendo overall because again, a game like this, unfortunately, is still a business, right? It's why we have to worry about the price of things. It's why we need to worry about, how things happen and the stuff. And I was curious of how they were able to even make the game in the first place. Because you have to understand, there's more than one game company out there. You have Microsoft, you have Blizzard, you have, Blizzard, Activision, Microsoft now. If you haven't heard of their merger, Microsoft bought them all out, and so they're all becoming one giant company. You have Bungie, you have Valve, you have a lot of different game studios, large and small. And you can really tell a quality difference in them. For instance, I don't think Blizzard makes good games anymore. If you haven't heard of Warcraft 3 Reforged, man, check it out. That was a masterpiece in how to kill your company in like a single day. That was insane. It was a remake of the old Warcraft 3 game, which is an old real-time strategy game. Okay, but it was a complete remake. They remade everything, and it completely dumpstered the game, released with bugs, and there was even missing content from the original game. Mind you, the game at that point was roughly, I think, about 12 years old, 13 years old. So imagine, a game that was running fine, that still had an active community, right? Again, a lot of these players were still paying for things like, custom hosted games that had much higher fidelity, map makers who specifically made tournament maps in order to compete on. And they killed it all in like one day. It's pretty impressive. Compare this to Nintendo, who, despite their... How do I say this nicely without potentially being on their radar? Despite their hate of the general gaming development community, which is strange to say, but they really hate mods. They hate mods unless it's mods of other games that aren't theirs, in which case then they'll get in contact with you. Or unless you're the guy who made Undertale, Toby Fox, in which case somehow you can make a mod of Earthbound and still get hired by them. I don't know how he finessed them. I really don't know. Aside from that, they have such a high standard of quality for the games that it hasn't been compromised in, literal decades. Even if right now, you can do it on the Switch, but there are other such ways to play them. If you play their older games, all their older games are just as good bangers, right? And it's interesting to me to see, because the truth about it is that you can't get that kind of quality without a top-down approach. That's the crux of what I'm trying to say, is that I don't know how they do it, but they've proven a theory of mine that I've had for a very, very long time in terms of what kind of businesses succeed and what kind of businesses fail. I've long since had this theory that for a business to succeed, you must have essentially top-down ownership and vision of the exact same thing. You can't be someone who's in it simply for the money. Because the cold truth of the matter is that money both grows on trees and is extremely high up for you to even reach, right? It grows everywhere. There's technically money lying around technically everywhere. The only problem is whoever can reach it, well, you have to build a ton of ladder. You can't just buy a ladder. You have to build one yourself. Everybody has to do this. And so the pain point isn't necessarily finding the money at all. The pain point is really trying to get to the money in the first place, trying to get it down. It seems like a pointless distinction because, you know, those two things seem so similar to each other that's like, why even bother, right? But I think that distinction is very important to make because it changes how you view these problems. Whereas before, you may view these problems as a matter of, oh, being in the right opportunity. Which, to be fair, you need to be in the right opportunity, okay? Like, I'm not saying that you can't be in the right opportunity. It's like, to continue the analogy, if you're walking around a desert and you're hoping to find like a money tree, good fucking luck. You're gonna starve, right? I said I wouldn't swear anymore. Stop swearing. However, even once you have the opportunity, you still can't do anything with it. And that's sort of like a differentiator that like appears, but it's very difficult to understand why it appears and why it even affects us. Because in a weird way, luck has such a huge effect on how we do things. And yet at the same time, luck alone cannot afford us the ability to have everything. In a weird way, you need to be able to use the funds correctly. You need to be able to actually like apply the funds. You need to be able to actually know what to do with all this. And you need to know how to actually extract all that value. You can have the best opportunity fall into your laps, and you still won't be able to use it if you don't know what you're doing. I think very often of that statistic of lottery winners. Lottery winners who, if you don't know this, most lottery winners absolutely blow their funds, like instantly. They absolutely blow all their funds. And the family keeps on calling them, or they just, you know, they just spend it very unwisely. And you see it happen a lot. There's even like famous people, or like people who play in like, you know, top level sports, NBA and stuff like that, NFL, NHL, or even people who just come into like a lot of money through what they do. They tend to blow it all because they don't understand enough how to hold on to it. They don't understand necessarily the value of it. And so there's a weird element here of both you need to have the ability to make use of it and the luck to even come upon it, which really, really sucks. But Nintendo as a company seems to have both, but they seem to rely heavily on their ability now. Whereas before they had a lot of luck, just getting into the market and doing effectively new things all across the board, right? And being sort of an overnight, I would say, overseas cultural phenomenon. Because again, when they started, they were a big company. They were doing, for context, Nintendo's like 100-something years old. They're like 180 or something. Like the company itself. They've gone through multiple cycles of leadership. And they have a lot of like stuff to rely on, right? They have a huge history to rely on, but they didn't start out making games. They started out making like cards, like playing cards and stuff, or something like that. So they've had to make good use of their skill because their time of luck has sort of like run out, right? It's not like nobody knows who Nintendo is. And it's not like nobody knows that if Nintendo releases a game, it's a banger, right? So they now have to keep releasing bangers at a high enough quality to meet the standards that people are expecting from the Nintendo brand, and at a good enough pace so that people don't necessarily forget them. And they're able to do so consistently compared to any other game company out there. Tying back to what I said before, I think it's due to two specific factors. One, the leadership of Nintendo has always been very, very strict on the vision. If you think about Mr. Shigeru Miyamoto, was that his name? I'm really bad with names. Like, you have to understand, I forget people's names IRL too. Shigeru Miyamoto, right? I believe he was the one from HAL. There were two, basically. There's a company called HAL, which works very, very closely with Nintendo. You may recognize their name as being one of the people who also made, I think, Kirby and Pokemon. Although now it's like Game Freak and stuff. They split off. It's like a whole history, right? And the guy started out as like an engineer there, and then he like worked his way up. One of them. It was either Shigeru Miyamoto or Satoru Iwata. One of the two. So even the leadership there come from the sort of the lowest levels, right? The leadership there comes from the group of people who are doing the work and understand how to make it work, right? They all share the same vision of making great things, which is very strange, because usually leadership doesn't promote those who would do the best. They simply promote those who they think they would like the most, or that fits their goals. I forget the term now, but Reddit pulled this off recently. It's a very specific term to a very specific action, but the general concept of it kind of applies. It's when you hire someone into a higher role, so you can then do a lot of like really painful changes, like getting rid of a bunch of free stuff or changing the core values and ethos, and then firing them after. It's the term I'm thinking of applies it specifically to women as CEOs. They're brought in to be like a soft face to then do all these like big changes and like to engender sort of like good pun. To sort of engender goodwill, and then they're fired after like a year, and then replaced with like someone else who the board actually wanted. It's like stepping stone CEOs or something. But the concept applies outside of just women CEOs as well. You see this a lot with like leadership. Being a CEO of a company is you're just a spokesperson. You're just a piece of the greater puzzle for the board, right? The board of directors. Yet Nintendo, through all this time, they have never had to deal with that sort of source of conflict between what the board wants and what the company needs to do to survive. Because those are two very different things. You can make a lot of money in the short term by essentially throwing everything under the bus and getting rid of everything that you ever did, right? You could do that, and you would run your company into the ground. Or you could keep doing what you're doing at the high quality, and people will buy your stuff at that quality because they understand what it is. They know what it's like. Because they have no fear about what you're doing. I'm trying to find leather armor, by the way, for our Road Warden playthrough, but I can't find any. So we're going to stick with the chainmail. Okay, we're going to stick with the chainmail as I Photoshop this chainmail now. Or maybe just a helmet, right? Let's just get like a leather cap. Leather cap. Leather cap. What is a leather cap called? What leather cap? RuneScape. What's it called? Not chaps. Cowl. Leather cowl. Again, I'm trying to find copyright-free stuff, so that I don't get into, so I don't run afoul of someone's copyright. But from the top down, they've been able to sustain that sort of mindset. And specifically, the thing that's very interesting about them is they're one of the few companies that has a lot of cash on hand. Now, cash on hand is typically seen as a bad thing in the business world. The idea is that if you're not spending the money, you're not making good use of the money, because you need to spend the money in order to grow in some way. That's kind of bullshit, because it's like, well, if you don't have the money and something bad happens, like COVID, everyone dies. Like literally everybody runs out of stuff, right? And your company will go downhill, because it's like, what are you gonna do, right? Like, you don't have the money anymore to like do anything. So, what Nintendo does differently compared to other companies is they seem to keep a large amount of cash flow on hand, which is pretty intense. Like they have a lot of money on hand, lot of money. Enough, I think, for at least like 10 years. It's somebody did like a calculation, and like their finances are online. It's like a decade's worth of operating expenses. So you can see immediately from the top down, their leaders are always people who know what the work is supposed to be. It's supposed to be. Like, they know how to make it happen, and they also understand the value of doing that work. They come from esteemed teams internally who have done the work. Satoru Iwata was the one who, for instance, he was able to make one of the Pokemon games fit on an entire cartridge, which again, the cartridges were very, very small back then, and was able to fit an entirely new continent on it as well as a bit of an expansion. Okay. Why you no connect? There we go. Shigeru Miyamoto, I think he was the one who took a pay cut as well. When Nintendo was having like hard times, I mean like hard times. This was during the Wii era, when the Wii definitely did not sell as well as it could have. But mind you, it was a fun console. I actually really liked it. He took a pay cut down to like $1, which again, it's more symbolic than anything. Executive compensation is typically done in terms of stocks and ownership and stuff like that, and so really his value at that time was whatever the Nintendo stock was. So he had a vested interest to make it go up, but still, it was the mindset that came about it, right? The mindset of even doing that in the first place spoke volumes of sort of where the priority was. And it's interesting to see it from the top down that this is what they do, and they've structured their business around it. They structure all their actions around it, right? They have enough cash flow on hand to weather the necessarily difficult selling cycles of games, because games, they're one of the few things that take a long time to make and have no guarantee of any return, because it is completely entirely on the whims of consumers, whether they like it or not. A great example of recent actually is Among Us. Among Us, big sus. If you didn't know, that game actually came out like 2017, 2018. It was under the radar for years, like literal years. No one just played it. Then all of a sudden gets really big and pops off and makes a lot of money. And stuff like this always happens, right? And it's very important that this stuff happens, because it sort of shows to people that, hey, if you have a long-term plan, you can make it in the game industry. But most companies don't. Most companies don't structure for a long-term plan in the games industry. Nintendo does. Strangely enough, they actually do. And that's a very weird thing to see in the industry because, again, if you look at Activision Blizzard, if you look at what they've done with Overwatch, you see immediately the kinds of decisions that they make differ very heavily. They don't go for the they don't go for the thing that people want. They go for the thing that makes the most financial sense at the moment. And because they've tied themselves down into their financial states. It's hard to sort of explain this without getting into more details about their financial statements, which I'm trying to avoid. I've read them, but I'm trying to avoid, and also I don't really remember them like offhand either. But the gist of it is that it's a change of leadership and a change of perspective that I think really makes certain studios shine above others. And even again, going back to the Blizzard Overwatch example, they've Jeff Kaplan left, I believe, a while ago. It was not super long ago, but it was fairly recent. When he left, you could tell a huge change in what was happening there. So now, the PvE mode is dead, which was again the entire justification, and they actually had like stuff ready for it. Apparently, a lot of stuff ready for it, but they just couldn't make it work. They couldn't get it happening, and they couldn't apparently. At least from what it seems like, from Jason Schreier and like his comments on Twitter and stuff, it seems like they weren't able to actually negotiate for the time needed to make it happen either. Because again, from what they said, a lot of developers put a lot of heart into it. You wouldn't put a lot of heart into something if you didn't think it was going to happen. And I can tell you right now, people will not put heart into something if they know it's going to get canned. Because game developers, they're foolhardy, but they're not stupid. They're very, very stubborn in what they do. But if they're not going to make any money from it, and they're not going to get paid more for it, why the hell would they do it? They know what's up. These people have been in the industry for, at least anywhere between like half a decade to a decade, right? They know what's going on the Overwatch team. And even the newer members would have taken that sort of knowledge from the higher level team members, ones who've been there for longer. So I think at least the overall operating structure of the companies can help at least somewhat explain why one can actually continue to, stick to their vision and actually make a game according to their vision, and the other can't. Which is a shame. Because it seems like the playbook is there. And it seems like anybody who copies Nintendo has an immediate playbook to win the entire industry. Which is actually very interesting to me, because a bunch of companies keep doing other things. They keep playing like regular business companies. They play like regular finance companies, where they spend a lot of money, they spend it really fast, look for investment opportunities, quote unquote, without actually thinking about, okay, what actually do you do, right? You're a product company. You're first and foremost a product company that also exists in an industry that has very, very long lead times between sales, right? And so it seems crazy to me that they don't just play the Nintendo playbook and take it slow and just slowly build out a moat to keep themselves alive, and then give their teams, the lower level teams who are actually making the product, full authority on things. I guarantee you, this is how Apple operates too, internally. I guarantee you. I'm pretty sure there was some expose, because I do remember reading something about it, but the idea being so that you give your product teams the final go-ahead, I do believe was kind of like in their DNA from the start, simply because I think it was Steve Jobs. It was either Steve Jobs or someone else who was really high up. They started out in in engineering, and then they used to bash on product because they were like, dude, like, it's your job to figure it out. Like, you should be given full control, and if you have all the control, you'd better figure it out. It's a very famous rant video. I'm not gonna find it for you. Just look it up. Look up, like, I don't know, Steve Jobs product rant. This is not an Arby's joke. This is not an Arby's joke. But that Arby's joke last time was a banger. Holy moly, that was an absolute banger. Again, that's just a pause for my throat. Well, it's not really a pause for my brain. You have no clue what I'm doing. I'm trying to get a leather bag for a road warden playthrough. I just had this idea in my mind, and I couldn't, like, I can't start playing the game until I do it. It's just there in my mind. But I think all of this greatly explains how a company like Nintendo is still able to do these things for so long. Their entire operating structure from the top down seems to support everything that they do in terms of game development. They do not give a damn about anything else. Game development is all that they do, and they do it really, really well. They work with great game designers, and if you... I don't know how to say this necessarily. It's rare for them to have disagreements with their game designers. I think the only one in recent time that I can think of was the game designer for a... was it Harvest Moon? Kind of like. It was a game about raising monsters, or like capturing monsters, or yokai spirits or something. That was the only time in recent history when a developer of theirs like left their umbrella, and like because they just couldn't work with them, right? Otherwise, if you see the CVs, like the resumes and sort of like all the people who like work there, dude, some of these people have been there for like a decade, like decades. They've been there for like tens of years. Game Freak, for better or worse, has this problem where they have a lot of older talents, not that much new talent, which I'll sort of get into in a bit. But the other arms of the company, stuff like the ones that work on Metroid, the ones that work on, you know, Mario, for instance. Mario especially, I think, is their most varied team, simply because of the funds that it brings in. Have very long-term people on those teams who have been doing this stuff for a long time. Contrast this with other companies where they don't really invest in the people, and they're probably gonna lose all of their people in, like, you know, a couple of years, right? And mind you, through all fault of their own. Not the people, but the companies themselves. Through all fault of their own, they just keep losing these people, the companies, because they simply cannot seem to hold on to them. They don't understand that the people is what makes the product, and that no two people are necessarily interchangeable. It's a major problem in corporate thinking that, you know, every person is a part, and you have human resources, and so you can just replace people like resources, like minerals. You can't. You just can't. Two people have very different ideas about things, very different talents, very different skill sets, and also very different ways of thinking that seem to generate unique ideas. If you know this, a lot of the stuff applies to the discussions around AI too. What makes an AI truly AI, and what makes an AI just something that makes copies? We still don't know. We don't even know ourselves, in terms of people, what allows people to be so different, have so many different varied opinions, ideas, and be able to come up with so many different things, so wildly different from each other. Right? I can't figure out what Apple does, right? But I don't think Apple could ever figure out what my stuff is either. It's not to say that my stuff is necessarily better or worse, but they're both very different, right? My brain, though, doesn't work the same way as Steve Jobs, or yours, whoever's watching. But it's because of that there's so much... How do you say this? variety in what people can make. A lot of variety. Nintendo, for some reason, seems to understand this, and they seem to be able to consistently keep their people long term. Obviously, this is hard for smaller studios. Smaller studios don't have the funds already to keep people for long periods of time. They have to have one banger success, and they have to rely on passion. But it seems they never seem to get out of the mindset of passion once they do make it, except for a very small few. I think about was it the people who made Bastion and Hades? Okay, Bastion was an absolute banger when it first came out. It was really, really good. If you don't know Bastion, I don't know how to explain it. Top-down, sort of roguelike, arena kind of game. Very, very fun. Roguelite, sorry. And very, very active playstyle. One of the best narrators in the entire, in like any game, except for maybe Darkest Dungeon. I think the Darkest Dungeon narrator does a much better job. And Darkest Dungeon 2 is out, and I really like the first one, and I really want to play the second one. So I'll find time for it. A studio like them, for instance, was able to keep the same team because they were able to share a lot of the wealth, it seems like. A lot of their team still works with them, and they're still working on all their future titles, like Hades and stuff. And that's impressive to me, because you rarely kind of see that happening in any kind of team, let alone smaller teams, even after a success. Very often you just see people kind of like drift away because of different priorities, or they weren't able to make enough money from it, or they weren't able to get enough of the shares of it, you know? So it's been very interesting to see how different game companies sort of operate. And it's been very interesting to see how the Nintendo playbook, even if you're applied at a small scale, seems to work just fine. Though, to be fair, they also had like external funding from, I think, Epic Games in order to release it as exclusive. And Epic Games, I mean, that's a whole other bag to like talk about. They do a lot of exclusivity deals, getting a lot of funds to be into like a company in order for them to make their games at the cost of exclusivity. But overall, I think the idea of building a moat and then actually like allowing your people to actually just make the game seems to work out very, very well. And again, the success story is Nintendo, is Valve, right? Another big company like that, again, is Valve. You don't know them. They're the guys who made Steam. So whatever you buy your PC games on, that's them. That's literally them. But not only do they make a very successful game store, you may be surprised to learn that they actually make games sometimes. They basically pushed for VR very heavily. They're one of the two major players of VR now. But even back then, they were one of the two because they're one of the two that understood what VR needed. Oculus paved the way for hardware, right? They were kind of the ones who said, okay, well, we need the correct hardware in a place. And now the guy who made Oculus makes like killer drones, which is crazy. If you haven't seen that article, it's nuts. Basically, the co-founder of Oculus now makes killer drones for war. It's wild. But he understood that VR needs the hardware to even get anywhere. Good hardware. Hardware that's at a high enough fidelity, high enough quality, and at a reasonable enough cost that people would actually buy it. Meta is simply taking that concept further after they purchased Oculus. And then Meta also said, well, you also need the software to go along with it, because no one's going to buy a VR headset if there's no games to play. And then they made the Metaverse, which, man, I don't even know how to explain this. If you've ever played it, it's awful. It's so bad. I tried it. I tried it for like a good 30 minutes with my headset, and I was like, this is awful. Like, I don't even know how to explain it. It just doesn't feel right for what it is, for what it should be. Valve is on the opposite end of that. They understood that you need the software to make it work, but they don't run like a traditional company like Facebook. They don't run like they don't run like a business focused thing. They don't run by KPIs or like metrics. They run by whatever game idea works well, right? Again, they do have a giant ass moat. They have the entire Steam store to make money off of. They don't need this to succeed. But Facebook, in a similar way, is in a very similar spot. They make a lot of money from Facebook alone. But they're stuck in this mindset of like, oh, must be certain metrics that you have to hit in order to make it a good thing. Valve's internal policies, at least as far as I'm aware from their sort of documents, as recent as 2018, at least, internally, has always been about, oh, if you have an idea, just organize a team, do it, and good luck. Like, the company gives you the resources, but you have to make it happen. But you get to own all of it. You get to own the entire process. You get to own the resources. You don't have to fight for it. Like, it is effectively your baby at that point. And they made Half-Life Alyx, right? Which, again, I've been playing by myself, which I may stream someday. I'll probably stream it someday because there's some cool mods for it too that I really want to try out. It is an amazing VR game. It's probably going to be one of the best VR games for a very long time. Which is crazy to me because now it's an old VR game. It's actually not new anymore. And again, the playbook seems to work. Give your product people a lot of time, a lot of money, and give them the resources to do what they do, and you'll find continual success over and over. Again, this is all easier said than done, because again, money, while it grows on trees and can be found in many, many places, isn't necessarily easily accessible. The accessibility of money is actually one of the bigger issues. It's not necessarily where to find the money. A shit ton of people have the money. You can find anybody to invest in your snake oil, right? But being able to con them out of it, that's really, really hard. But it does seem to lend credence to that sort of philosophy. And I'm curious one day if another game company can actually figure that out. It seems like Blizzard is trying to figure that out now, and they're sort of on the cusp of it. They had it before, and then Bobby Kotick came in, and then sort of kind of ruined the entire deal. Kind of made the entire thing sort of impossible to work with. Made it much more business-like, and then went really downhill. Riot Games seems to be falling into that as well. Though the Riot Forge idea, which if you haven't heard or seen, you don't even know Riot Games. They make League of Legends, now Valorant as well. And both really good games by their own right. Sometimes, most of the time. They've just released a program called Riot Forge, where independent game developers can work with them, get some level of partnership. I think some funding, but I'm not entirely sure. I haven't read the latest terms and details when I looked into it from my projects. But they basically give you free reign to use their IP. In order to build the games that you think would fit best in their IP, though I think you do have to go through like a proposal process, I'm pretty sure. And it's very interesting to see them also sort of discover that same sort of lesson of give your product people what they need to succeed, and as your IP grows, you're going to get more and more funds from it. Again, they also made Arcane, hit animation TV show. Anime show, I don't even know if you can call it TV shows given it was only on streaming platforms, right? Really, really good show. Solid animation, solid writing, and also really good demonstration of what the IP could offer. It also took like 7 or 8 years to make, because they had to build entirely new technology for it, because there was nothing like it outside. Like literally, there's like no technology out there that can actually do what they needed it to do, which is nuts, extremely nuts. Because you would think that there's animation software out there that can do it at that scale that they need, but Flash is dead. And Flash, long live Flash, rest in peace Flash. Flash was the best thing ever. I love Flash. If you don't know Flash, go to newgrounds.com. Wait, maybe not. Maybe don't go. No, go to newgrounds.com. It's safe enough now. Back then it wasn't that safe. Now it's safe. Well, it was always safe back then. But like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not unsafe because of the content. Sometimes it's unsafe because of the people. Most of the time. But now it's okay. But ever since Flash died, yeah, there's been nothing like it. But they're now starting to learn that lesson, Riot Games. And so their latest games, coming from their IP, some of them are hits, some of them are misses. I think Convergence, which was recently announced, is going to be a banger. It's a story about Echo, which is actually very, very cool. And the gameplay mechanic is basically it's just Braid. It's literally just Braid. But still, It's braid action with parkour, like platforming, which seems really cool. Which if you haven't seen it, check it out. Why am I shilling for them? They're not even sponsoring me. What? If there's an employee from Riot Games here, for the love of God, sponsor me. I'm talking about your game for God's sake. And Riot Games is not a small company, mind you. They're owned by Tencent. They have a lot of money, and if you don't know Tencent, know that they're basically China's premier game publishing and holding company. They have a lot of money. Like, a lot of money. It's not even funny how much money they have. It's kind of absurd how much money they have, actually. However, just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean you can't fail. Look at Blizzard, right? So the playbook, the Nintendo playbook that more and more companies are starting to adopt, and that I hope more companies start to realize, is sort of like pay real close attention to your product, pay close attention to what makes it good, and iterate only on that. Hopefully more people do that. Because again, product is what makes it here. In the game dev world, it's all product, and it's all safety and moat. In a very weird way, you can't be as risky in games in the same way that you normally would in other areas, right? In a lot of other industries, you would have to pay a lot of money to be risky. But that risk would come with great rewards. In games, you pay a lot of money to be risky, and all you get is a bunch of infrastructure that you have to now support. A bunch of technology that you now have to take care of, because that's how it's going to work. Actually, a great example of this, a counter-example of when this actually doesn't work. Well, actually, no, an example of like why you need the Nintendo structure, because it won't work otherwise, is actually Sony. Specifically, Square Enix within Sony, but Sony as a whole as well. Sony often has really hit or miss hits. Their game companies, you can tell, they try to push a lot of certain things, but if it doesn't hit certain metrics, it simply doesn't sell. Days Gone, for instance, it was supposed to get a sequel, or they were trying to pitch one internally, but they couldn't justify the business expenses for it. Whatever they did simply wasn't enough for them to be like, oh yeah, this game deserves a sequel. Even though it actually sold fairly well, all things considered. And the story and the gameplay were actually decent. Again, I've been playing it on stream, which I'll get back to very, very soon. Don't worry, I will get back to it. I just need to figure out how to slot it in with Tears of the Kingdom, because I love Tears of the Kingdom. Really good stuff. Also, I'm sorry that this bag is taking so long to like trim out. But this is nice too, because my brain has been like rotted from Tears of the Kingdom. And I'm going to stream for like 12 hours today, because I slept in for so long. Like, I'm going to stream for a very long time today. So we're going to be up for a long day. So it doesn't really matter if I take a long time to crop this bag out. And this is all for one game, Road Warden. Can you imagine? I care about the quality of my VODs. Okay? About the quality of my stuff. So sorry. Not sorry. But Sony seems to run into this problem. Square Enix as well. They've learned their lesson, Square Enix, actually. They made Final Fantasy 15. I think it's 15. The one with the boys going on the camping trips, which I will also play on stream, because I really love just, like, the idea of, like, a couple of dudes just, like, hanging out, saving the world. It's such a weird, like, concept. Their Luminous engine was a complete disaster. Wasted, I think, millions of dollars. And then they had to support it. They made a bunch of weird business decisions that not at all, like, it really didn't support the product. And then the entire thing got, like, axed anyways because they couldn't afford to run it, right? Now, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a complete banger because it's Final Fantasy VII. You can't go wrong with that. And they don't even have to own any of the tech. It's all being developed by Epic Games, who owns Unreal Engine. In a weird way, games, unlike regular tech, investments into and taking risks with your funds to build better technology and sort of to try to diversify holdings usually doesn't result in much gain. Nobody cares about diversity. Well, I guess this applies to society as well as games, but nobody cares about diversity in terms of how many games you have and what kind of gameplay styles they are coming from a studio. They actually just, like, players just want the same game over and over. And that's the thing that, again, the large companies that understand the philosophy have already figured out. Half-Life, it's just the same game over and over. Half-Life Alyx is just Half-Life, but in VR. Tears of the Kingdom, it's just the old Zelda games, but with an open world instead of their fake open world. Do you think about think of Zelda: A Link to the Past, a Game Boy Advance Zelda. Okay, the shit is old. I had this thing when I was like a tiny little like gremlin child. That game was a banger. Okay, it felt like an open world, and it felt like a huge sense of adventure, even though it was not at all. It just didn't have an open world. Like it simply didn't have it. But it's the same game under the core of it. If you think about what Tears of the Kingdom is and what Link to the Past is, it's adventure, it's exploration, it's curiosity, it's challenging and pushing yourself through challenges and making the best of the tools that you have. It's the same game over and over, and people just want the same games over and over. So the kinds of risks that work for other companies, right? Diversifying your holdings and stuff for an investment company, or even for a non-investment company, even like a more traditional product company, say like you're making bags of chips as Doritos, risking some money to make a new flavor is actually worth it, right? But because people will want more flavors from your chips. But this, in games, it simply doesn't work. The entire system rewards instead sticking to your roots, understanding what makes it work, and simply evolving it and iterating on it and making it better piece by piece. Anyways, that was my entire spiel about Nintendo. I'm finally done. Thank God this bag is finally done. Jesus Christ. We're gonna get on to Roadwood in just a moment as I get some water. Give me 2 seconds.